as a forensics investigator, you want the data on the local machine from the image. Some of the data exist inside of the image in the form of logging, whether that's on the Unix side of the house, it would probably be syslog. On the Windows side of the house, it would be EVT files. But then you want to take this pattern of activity and events that have occurred on the workstation inside of that timeline and bring that out to a super timeline. Especially if you're doing a forensics investigation that includes multiple machines, an intrusion, say, of malware, or network forensics along with it. So when you start widening your scope from just this one workstation out to other places, now it's not an adversarial getting into this particular image here. It is an optimization of all the data that you have from all of the resources where the data is flowing across the network. What you want to do is you want to reach in and say, okay, I can't take images of all these machines and make sense out of that. I probably could, but what I should do is I should get external data and use that to support the evidence for this particular item right here. I'll choose logs from the different devices on our network. I have to organize those logs so that I see at the edge of the network, the firewall, the router said this, then the firewall said this, then the intrusion detection system said this, and then the workstation said this. Each one of these elements in the set has its own log. We want to take all those logs, put them into one timeline. That's our super timeline. That says, here's the pattern, here's the way the events occurred. We're going to bring all those together under log correlation. In order to make log correlation work, we need to talk and have a deep discussion about time and time synchronization. What we do in the forensics of logs, and we have to dig down into those logs and realize that when we present them as evidence in a court of law, if that's where we're going, we have to take a little bit of care and concern with the forensics in logs because there is a problem with that, and also using that as evidence in a court or even in arbitration. You have to be careful. Then we're going to talk about audit trails, the importance of audit logs, the legality of using them. And a lot of people do this concept of logging everything. Can you imagine sorting and sifting through all these different logs for all these different tools out there? Well, they want to log it all in a lot of cases. Then we're going to interact with enterprises and they manage these logs in a particular way. We have to be aware of the log management techniques that are out there. Their correlation that they do may be at odds with our correlation and what we do. Usually that is a result of regulatory bodies saying you must log this activity, and they say, well, we only have so much logging space, so they log that activity and none of the other stuff. We'll talk a little bit about Linux processing accounting, syslog, the syslog servers, how to set one up, and then we'll start talking about the individual logs like network logs, applications, and we'll use the correlation concepts and bring those things together. We'll dig down into the Windows event viewer, talking about the differences in the event viewer, and finally we'll talk a little bit about some tools that you can use. So let's pretend that we're going to court for a moment in time. Can you tell the court the order of events? What do you use to tell them the order of events? Well, we know on the local workstation we're looking for, if it's Vista or better, we're looking for the UTC time for each activity that happened inside the registry. We're also looking at it for the files that are on the local machine, on the modified, access, changed, and deleted information. Remember, the deleted information comes from the recycle bin in the Info2, I believe. So we've got all those things here, but that's our timeline here. When we reach out and look at the entry into the network, we need timelines, now super timelines, to bring together all the externalities from this workstation and everything that flowed here. If you were actually doing a forensics investigation of that flow to you, one of the other things that you could use to establish the fact of ownership and also attribution of time is you could reach out to maybe a wireless access point or a wireless router, or maybe they have inside of a house, they might have something like the logging on the cable internet connectivity. or maybe they have dial-up and you could get the dial-up logs at that point off of that particular external modem. So remember, you're looking for things external to this, and they can help you to show the pattern of activity over a period of time associating this person with this particular activity. Now what we need to do is we need to synchronize. Why do we need to synchronize? Because we're showing the order of events to somebody else. So if the computer clocks aren't synchronized, or they're off kilter from each other, and you don't take that into account when you're doing all your math here on this particular individual workstation, if you don't take that into account, then all that external information is going to collide with this internal information. A perfect example of this in, say, a home setting would be the individual computer here, and then they've got their logging mechanism set up inside of the cable modem that's out there. And maybe the cable modem is actually logging activity. That activity that's logged there, that clock is skewed forward, so it's not keeping the correct time, and it's 5 or 6 days ahead, and your local workstation is 5 or 6 days behind. You have to know that when you retrieve the logs from that cable modem out there, that you have to set that and match up the timeline on that to go ahead and say, okay, we need to shift everything back 5 days, and where you're on this local workstation here, you need to shift forward 5 days and also get the time accurate down to at least the second. We need to synchronize these things. We have to correlate them. And the only thing that we have working for us is that the time is the same when we come in and say, okay, what's the time on this computer? And we calculate that and say, yes, in fact, all the events on this particular machine, the real world clock outside of us, and all the events on that particular cable modem up there, we've adjusted and made them correlate to the real world time. And then we can lay out a timeline. How do we do this? How do we synchronize this? What do we do in a corporate environment? Well, we use the particular protocol, the network time protocol. It's a really nice tool that is actually being utilized on most workstations today automatically. So the synchronization is there. It's fault tolerant, and any kind of failures on the part of the major clocks and the network time protocol on the outside aren't felt by the individual workstations on the inside. So we get accurate timing mechanisms on most operating systems today. Remember, our adversaries are going to say, well, I don't want anybody knowing when I did these things, and they may do time stomping, where they're actually going to change your time. When somebody does an infestation of malware on a server, say they attack a web server, one of the things they do to cover their tracks is start messing with the time on that machine. They start changing everything and stomping all of that so that you can't create a timeline. We want to use UTC time. That's where we want to focus as forensics investigators. We want to say, starting here at Greenwich Mean Time, and we're going to offset for the location where this computer was. They're in the Eastern time zone, or they're in the Central time zone, or wherever they are. We want to say this is the recorded activities at that time based on this one central clock. It works well. Now, a little deeper into this, this is more on the testing side of things, is talking about NTP and the stratums. So when we talk about stratum levels, what we're doing is we're talking about how close to perfect time we actually are and how those servers keep that time. For the U.S., we use an atomic clock, which is, I believe, at the National Naval Observatory. And that's all based on the decay of uranium is constant over thousands and thousands of years. That clock right there is the central time for us and most time servers that we use. That is perfect time. That's stratum 0. And we don't want to burden that perfect time with our individual requests as end users, because then it would spend all of its time servicing those requests, and that could cause drift. So what we do is we create a hierarchical structure that says we as individual workstations or an individual network won't ask a stratum 0 server. And by the way it's designed in stratum 0 is you don't have access to that server, and actually it's not even networked at that point. So that stratum 0 server has perfect time on it, and it communicates with directly connected Stratum 1 servers down below it. You could probably get time from a Stratum 1 server, but there's a lot more elegant way to do it in a corporate environment. What you actually do is you use GPS, and you actually stand up a GPS signal so that you're talking to the satellites, because all the satellites have to be synchronized perfectly with all of their time. So you'll stand up a GPS unit within your building, on the top of your building, and it'll talk to the satellite and say, what time is it? And he'll pull that down and make you into what boils down to a Stratum 2 server. Because Stratum 0, never talk to. They're actually directed connected to Stratum 1 servers. In order to talk to Stratum 1 servers, usually what happens is we actually communicate with satellites through some sort of networking capability to get to that really perfect time, the Stratum 1 for those satellites up there. So now we're going to a network version of things. In Stratum 1, we go down to Stratum 2. Now we can do a network communication, and we can even go further down the list to Stratum 3, all the way. The protocol is designed to go all the way down to Stratum 15, I believe. But most of the time what we do is we do Stratum 2 or 3, and that's where we can get updates from those time servers. When you go into a Windows machine and you ask for the Windows time server, you're actually talking to a Stratum 1 server at that point that has replicated the NTP across a bunch of servers across the world. When it comes to evidence, and we're talking about time, we know that we've got computers and intermediate computers, and we've got firewalls out there, internet working devices in the victim's computer. They're all going to be talking their own time. We'd love all the synchronization for all of that evidence to be perfectly lined up. We have to make sure about that. We have to validate that at the beginning of our forensics investigation. One of the things that we talk about in the early evidence collection is, what time is it on the computer exactly? And can we match that up and see that in fact it is using the correct time? I would look at the time, and I would also look at what kind of time server you're actually using. So when we're examining an intrusion, we monitor for the intrusion and the security breach events. That's necessary. In the post-attack detection or passive intrusion detection, we detect any of the intrusions that occur after the attack has occurred. So in those intrusion detection systems, we log that activity and we get a timestamp on it. We're going to inspect those log files, and we're going to rebuild that attack. We're going to design a super timeline that says this is when these things occurred. Now, in active intrusion detections, we're going to look at the attacks as soon as they take place. The administrator is going to say, hey, you know what? This I'll record in my log here. That administrator of that intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system is going to get an alert that says, hey, you're under attack right now. And immediately at that time, in our evidence examination, we're going to see that what was logged was help desk call came in at this particular time saying that we were under attack, or intrusion detection people got this packet capture and said we were under attack. That's going to be direct evidence. This person saw the attack, they recorded it, we need that data. That's what we're going to use in examining our intrusion, along with all that automated stuff. So we've got to reach out to all these other people that are keeping time and logging activity on the network.